Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube page. My name is Eric, and today on The Investigative Millennial, we're going to be talking about a topic that is pretty much ubiquitously talked about in skeptical circles when discussing the Bible, and that is contradictions. Now today, we're going to be talking about contradictions from two different angles. One is we're going to be addressing some particular contradictions that skeptics try to say are in the Bible, specifically in the early years of Jesus. But we're also going to be discussing why the way that skeptics try and apply the whole contradictions objection to the Bible, the way that they try and apply it is fundamentally flawed, and it needs to be re-examined. Now, in our series, we've been talking about already a few contradictions from Jesus' early years, such as the alleged discrepancies in Jesus' genealogy, as well as the angelic experiences of Joseph and Mary separately. But today, we're going to be diving into a more broad topic, which is, where exactly did Jesus grow up? Did he flee to Egypt, or did he stay in Nazareth? Well, we're going to find out. So, as stated before, the tension lies in Luke chapter 2, verses 39 through 40, and Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 through 20. You know, Matthew's gospel says that they fled from Herod, whereas Luke's and they fled to Egypt until Herod died. Luke's gospel, on the other hand, also says that they instead says that they went back home to Nazareth. Now, the first thing we need to realize when harmonizing these things is that the traditional nativity scene is wrong. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, most nativity scenes kind of have a few shepherds and a few magi, basically all in the stable, along with Mary and Joseph, and Jesus is basically, in the manger. Now, here's the thing. That is very unlikely to have happened, and I'm going to argue that, honestly, it pretty much is unbiblical. You see, Luke's gospel does tell us that Jesus was born in Bethlehem because they were on a trip for the census, Mary and Joseph, but naturally, the baby came while they were on that, and they had to find a place very quickly. That is when the shepherds found Jesus, and, they told everybody about this. Now, that did happen in Luke's gospel. Now, after that, we get a long series of events such as Jesus' circumcision, which would have happened when he was 8 days old. After that, he was consecrated in the temple because he was a firstborn. But also, we have to remember that the events with Simeon and Anna, they wouldn't have taken that long. Jesus was probably no more than he was probably only about 2 weeks old by the time he got home to Nazareth. Keep that in mind because it's going to be an important detail later. Now, we skip then into Matthew chapter 2, and verse 1 says, sometime after Jesus was born. It doesn't specify how much time has passed. It just says sometime afterwards. This is when Herod got word of Jesus being born in Bethlehem from the Magi. Now, how much time has passed then? Well, there's actually a very big clue in the Gospel of Matthew itself. Herod orders, after the Magi visit Jesus and they're warned in a dream to, return home by a different route, that King Herod ordered that every child 2 years old and under be killed. Now, why exactly is Herod ordering kids that are 2-year-olds to be killed if Jesus was just recently born? Well, the answer is he wasn't. We also see another clue. that this isn't the same event. In the 11th verse of the 2nd chapter of Matthew, we see that the Star of Bethlehem leads the Magi to the house, it says, that the child was staying at. Now, and that's where they bowed down and worshipped him and gave him their gifts. Now, another good question is, well, why exactly were Mary and Joseph back in Bethlehem? Weren't they from Nazareth? Why are they back there 2 years later? Well, the answer is actually pretty plausibly that they were up there for Jewish festivals. It would be very plausible for Jewish families to travel for different festivals, and in many cases, they would simply stay the night, for those sort of events. So, in this case, they were lucky enough to actually get, an inn. So, basically, the order of events is Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Joseph and Mary circumcised him, and they also had these episodes with Simeon and Annas. And they went back to Nazareth. Then, for another Jewish festival, they traveled to Bethlehem. The Magi came, saw them, and then afterwards they escaped to Egypt. Until, of course, after Herod died, and thus they could come back to their hometown, Nazareth. Now, the final bit of tension that we may want to think about is the Gospel of Luke chapter 2, verse 41. It says, every year Jesus' parents went up to Jerusalem for Passover. Now, of course it says Jesus' parents went up there, and so we could always say that Jesus just didn't go up there because his life was in danger, and they went alone, but I don't really find that likely. But here's why that wouldn't really be a problem. Yes, the angel does say to stay there in Egypt until he tells them to go, but you have to realize that, again, he was most likely referring to them having a permanent residence in Egypt. It doesn't mean that he's just basically saying don't live in Nazareth anymore. Not that you can't take, say, a day trip up to Jerusalem, which isn't the same place that they would be looking for Jesus anyway, because, again, those are two different places. And also, on top of that, trying to find Jesus in Passover with all the hundreds of thousands of crowds going there is a fool's errand. So it's not really like Jesus would be in any danger of being discovered, especially when back then they didn't have photo ID. So Herod would not have any chance of detecting Jesus if he was just going up for Passover. There is one more contradiction that's talked about in the early years, such as when was Jesus born, and Inspiring Philosophy, aka Michael Jones, has already done 2 videos on that, and I would check those out if you haven't already to really address that, because I don't have time to address it here. So that's really why I don't think these events are really contradictory. But there's one more aspect of this that we need to cover when dealing with skeptics. So here's the problem skeptics seem to run into. They seem to say that, well, if their Bible has contradictions, therefore, I can't trust any of it. This isn't how history works. For example, let's take an event like the burning of Rome. The historians Suetonius and Dio contradict and disagree on some of the details, such as Nero openly sending men to burn the city, and some cases he said he did it in secret. And Tacitus says he didn't do it at all, or that he may not have been responsible at all. Now, does this mean that because they disagree about some events, that therefore that means the whole event didn't happen, like the burning of Rome? No. In fact, from a psychological standpoint, we know that many times there are many times where different details stick out to different people. such as in eyewitness testimonies or in detective stories or in police work. People will, J. Warner Wallace, who was a homicide detective, notes this very extensively. He says, yes, there are many times where people will differ on some details, but it doesn't mean that the whole event or the whole crime didn't happen. Some cases, those contradictions can be resolved, and others they can't. My point with all this is that even if we were to grant that the contradictions are irreconcilable in the Bible, which we don't, this wouldn't be the death blow to Christianity that people think it is. In fact, if testimonies are too similar, it's actually suspect. So it's actually good that the Gospels don't easily and readily copy each other. So, that's all for today. We will be talking much more about the Gospels in future videos, but for now, this will be it, and I hope you all learned something and had a good time. Sources will be in the description. Bye, guys.